The Odyssey is a new film from acclaimed director Christopher Nolan, the man behind The Dark Knight, Inception, Oppenheimer, and other dense, ponderous epics with elliptical storytelling. The Odyssey promises to be his most ambitious effort yet, an adaptation of Homer's 2,700-year-old epic poem that cost $250 million to make. Sounds like a decent time at the movies, right? To some, sure. But there are also lots of people out there openly rooting for The Odyssey to fail, and the trailers have gotten more dislikes than any others in Nolan's career. Why? It depends on who you ask. Some took the movie to task for breaches of historical accuracy. Ancient Greeks didn't wear shiny plastic Batman armor. They didn't sail around in Viking longboats. They didn't talk with American accents. That kind of thing. But by far, the thing that had people the most up in arms was the casting, which produced a backlash that spiraled into the big culture war battle of May 2026, the latest in a long line of similar battles. And before the movie actually opens, I wanted to see if I could shove that backlash into some kind of wider context on this episode of... Let's go! Before we get to the casting backlash, let's look at some of the other critiques of the movie floating around out there, because in general, they're a lot more fun. The critique that surprised me most was that the movie kind of looks dreary, gray, and colorless. The Odyssey is the story of the Greek king Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, trying to make his way home to Ithaca after spending years away fighting in the Trojan War. It's an adventure story. He meets a cyclops, sea monsters, goddesses, nymphs, and the whole thing takes place in the Mediterranean, one of the sunniest places on Earth. Shouldn't the movie look more vibrant? I don't know, maybe. There's a 2024 adaptation of The Odyssey called The Return that is bathed in sunlight and has lots of bright colors, and it looks great. But I was surprised that people expected that out of a Christopher Nolan movie in particular, because his stuff has just never really looked like that. His movies look bleak and dreary and kind of monochromatic. At this point, it's kind of his signature look, so I wasn't surprised when The Odyssey followed suit. I'm not saying the movie won't look impressive up on the big screen. The Odyssey is the first movie to ever be shot entirely in IMAX format, long a fixation of Nolan's, but bright, colorful, that was never going to happen. Next up, some people did not like the use of modern language in the trailers, like the use of the words dad and daddy, rather than more formal terms like father.
You're pining for a daddy you didn't even know. My dad is coming home.
Or that everyone is speaking in American accents, even British actors like Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson. For the record, Holland plays Odysseus' son Telemachus, and Pattinson plays Antonius, an aristocrat who takes advantage of Odysseus' absence by trying to court his wife Penelope, played by Anne Hathaway. So, if Christopher Nolan and his team wanted to be 100% authentic to the time period, everyone would be speaking ancient Greek, and I don't think anyone seriously expects that to happen. The movie is being made by an English-speaking director with English-speaking audiences in mind. They're gonna speak English. What's interesting is I think a lot of people wouldn't have as much of a problem with this if the actors all spoke English with English accents, since in Hollywood movies, English accents are just kind of a shorthand for, like, old-timey. For instance, the 1998 movie Les Miserables is set in 19th century France, based on the book by French author Victor Hugo. The movie is made for English-speaking audiences, so no one expects the actors to actually speak French. But they're a talented bunch. They could affect French accents for the sake of verisimilitude, right? But they don't.
I needed to think about what you deserve.
They all talk in English accents, and we buy it, because in Hollywood movies, the English accent is just the accent they speak in the past, no matter the setting. So having everyone in the Odyssey speak with American accents is exactly as realistic, which is to say exactly as unrealistic, as having them all speak in English accents. We're just not as used to it. It's the same thing with words like dad and daddy. I will admit, they sound a little weird in this milieu, but that's just because movies have trained me to think that people in ye olden times say father, even though it doesn't make sense for any of these characters to be using any of these words, like the English language wouldn't exist until hundreds of years after this. I suspect I'll forget about these kinds of stylistic choices 20 minutes into the movie after I get used to them. Although I am partial to the idea that Nolan, who himself is British, made everyone speak in American accents because Matt Damon couldn't pull off a British one. I have no proof of that, I just think it's funny. Speaking of Matt Damon, let's pivot to the casting, because that's where the real magic happened. A lot of people got very upset that Oscar-winning actress Lupita Nyong'o was cast as Helen of Troy. Like on the first trailer for the movie, a trailer in which Lupita Nyong'o does not appear at all, most of the top comments are disparaging her. This thing got very heated. So who is Helen of Troy? Well, in the most popular version of the myth, Helen of Troy is the daughter of Zeus, god of thunder, and Leda, the wife of the Spartan king Tyndareus. Zeus takes the form of a swan, gods can do that, and makes sweet bird love with Lita. Later, Helen hatches from an egg laid by her human mother. Probably it's bigger than this. Being divine in origin, Helen grows up to be the most beautiful woman in the world, and eventually marries a guy named Menelaus, played in the new Odyssey movie by John Bernthal. Then a dude named Paris either abducts or seduces her, it depends on which version of the myth you're consulting, and takes her to Troy, which is what sparks the Trojan War. All of this happens before the Odyssey, which takes place after the Trojan War, when Helen is back with Menelaus. In Homer's poem, Helen appears in book 4 of 24, when she and Menelaus host Telemachus in their hall, and Helen, spikes everyone's drinks to make sure they're all having a nice time. Alright, so why were people mad about this? Well, if you read a lot of the commentary at face value, many don't think Nyong'o is beautiful enough to play Helen of Troy. The face that emptied 1,000 theaters. The face that closed 1,000 wallets. Yes, very clever. As conservative commentator Matt Walsh tweeted, not one person on the planet actually thinks that Lupita Nyong'o is the most beautiful woman in the world. Elon Musk agrees, for the record. Thank God he chimed in. Now, as someone on the sidelines, this all seems kind of silly to me, because obviously there is no one objective standard of beauty. Like, we all know the cliche, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But also, the folks arguing that Lupita Nyong'o isn't beautiful have an uphill battle because, I mean, come on. Brief side story, I first saw Lupita Nyong'o in 12 Years a Slave, which was her breakout role. She won her Oscar for that. And I remember being almost, taken out of the movie by how pretty she was, and I do not mean that as a compliment. She plays a slave named Patsy who is brutally abused and who spends long hours doing punishing work in the fields, but I had trouble buying that because her skin is glowing and she looks like she walked right off a fashion runway onto set. I genuinely thought her beauty hurt the film a bit. Her acting was still great, but I remember having that thought. That said, no human woman cast as the most beautiful woman in the world is going to meet everyone's expectations, because beauty is a subjective thing. I agree with the YouTuber Lady of the Library, who knows way more about the Odyssey than I do, that they should have taken a cue from Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings movies, and maybe surrounded Helen with a heavenly glow to visually represent untouchable beauty. But again, that's not Christopher Nolan's style. He likes to keep things more grounded for better or worse. But I'm dancing around the real issue here, because a lot of these critics didn't exactly object to Lupita because she isn't pretty enough, but more because she's black, which they think is disqualifying. As the top comment on that first trailer reads, Helen of Wakanda. So the argument is basically that Lupita Nyong'o can't play Helen of Troy because Helen of Troy was white and Lupita Nyong'o isn't. So, is that true? Well, insofar as Helen can be anything, let's remember that she is a mythical woman who hatched from an egg. You'd think she would look Greek, right? With typical Greek coloring. Dark hair, olive skin, that kind of thing. Homer doesn't describe her in much detail, but he does call her white-armed a couple of times in the Iliad, which seems pretty clear. Although there are some who argue that that's less about race and more about aristocratic status, as in she's white-armed because she's rich and gets to stay inside all day and doesn't have to go work outdoors in the sun. Here Helen is with dark hair on a vase made a few hundred years after the Odyssey was written, give or take. This is one of the more famous paintings of Helen of Troy by Friedrich Sandys in 1867, where she's a redhead. Orson Welles famously cast Eartha Kitt as Helen of Troy in his 1950 stage play Time Runs. Galen Gorg played her on a 1996 episode of Xena, Warrior Princess. So she has been played by dark-skinned actors in the past, and we all survived, so I think we'll be fine this time too. But yes, the real Homer, if he was really one guy and not multiple people who wrote this over a period of time. The poem is thousands of years old, the records are not perfect. Likely didn't think of Helen of Troy as a black woman. But he probably didn't picture pasty-ass Matt Damon as Odysseus either. Matt Damon has English, Scottish, Finnish, and Swedish heritage. Ethnically, he is exactly as unqualified to play a Greek character as Lupita Nyong'o. The same goes for Robert Pattinson and Tom Holland and Anne Hathaway. None of them claim any Mediterranean heritage, let alone Greek. So if what people are upset about is historical authenticity, they should be just as mad about Damon and Holland as they are about Nyong'o. And to be clear, some people are. Actual Greek people have called out this movie for its lack of Greek representation, and I think that's valid. If you're Greek and you're upset that the movie set in and around ancient Greece has no Greek people in it, I get that. But a lot of these critics were way more upset about Nyong'o than they were about anybody else, even though she has a comparatively minor role. Which makes me think that, at least for them, it's not really about historical accuracy. So, a lot of people on YouTube contributed to the Odyssey backlash, and if you sample some of their videos, a few common themes start to emerge. For instance, many suggest that casting Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy is an instance of Hollywood forcing diversity in where it doesn't belong, which is part of a broader trend that Hollywood has been pushing onto unsuspecting theatergoers for years.
As all of you know, in the past decade or so, Hollywood has gone hard in its quest to prioritize political messaging, DEI initiatives, and identity-driven casting over storytelling, audience appeal, and fidelity to source material.
As all of you know, there were a lot of people coming up with conspiracy theories to explain why Christopher Nolan would cast his movie this way, implying that a director of his caliber and reputation normally wouldn't do it, absent some kind of secret motive.
Confusing as the vision may seem, the controversy itself was almost certainly calculated into the equation from day one.
A huge part of the problem is Hollywood's obsession with filtering every classic story through current ideological trends and contemporary culture instead of, what? Respecting the source material. They can't do it. Probably because they have to go through the DEI checklist so that it's eligible for the Oscars. Most likely what Nolan is doing.
Yeah, that was an angle some of the critics ran with for a minute. So, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences updated its representation and inclusion standards in 2020. And the conspiracy was that Nolan only cast actors like Nyong'o in The Odyssey, so the movie would meet those standards and he could take home a few more Oscars. But the conspirators abandoned that angle pretty quickly, because literally every Best Picture winner since 1929, including the ones made during the Jim Crow era, qualifies under these same standards. So the idea of Nolan compromising his casting process to meet them makes no sense. But if one conspiracy theory fails, the critics are ready with another.
Let's just say the worst case scenarios are true. I think it's about the top dog of a dying industry reinforcing the bad ideas that led to the decline of Hollywood.
You know, if you want to know why Christopher Nolan cast Lupita Nyong'o in The Odyssey, you can just ask him. As he told Elle, the strength and the poise were so important to the character of Helen, and Lupita makes it look effortless. She's just an incredible person to work with, and I was absolutely desperate for her to do the part. So it sounds like Nolan cast Nyong'o because he thought she would do a good job and he wanted to work with her, which is an explanation I just don't have a very hard time swallowing. I don't think we need conspiracies to explain it. Another cast member who sent the backlashers into a tizzy was trans actor Elliot Page, who was playing someone. By the time this video comes out, we'll probably know who he's playing, but when all this blew up, rumor had it that Page was either playing Elpenor, a member of Odysseus' crew, or the ghost of Achilles, who appears in book 11 of the Odyssey, and then again for a split second at the very end. Like Helen, Achilles is basically in one chapter of this thing. The idea of Page playing Achilles especially upset these people. It even made the fake far-right news.
You might even remember Brad Pitt played Achilles in a movie 20 years ago, meaning we've gone from Brad Pitt to a girl who dresses as a guy who's 5'1", 118 pounds. That's the person that's going to be playing the greatest warrior in history, because to the left, that is normal.
I love how the anchor pretends like all of these mythological figures are household names.
Achilles, who is described throughout history as being a superhuman warrior, deadly on the battlefield, he even defeated Hector of Troy.
Oh my god, he even defeated Hector? Holy shit. In general, I have a very hard time believing that all of the people outraged about Nolan's casting choices feel that way because they just love the Odyssey so much and can't bear to see it changed. And I don't even say that as a judgment, because I am right there with them. I think I care about the Odyssey about as much as most people care about the Odyssey, which is to say, I don't care about the Odyssey very much. I mean, I read it for this video, but I haven't studied it. I'm not a classicist. By and large, what I know about the Odyssey I picked up from parodies and modern interpretations and stuff. I am not slavishly devoted to this world, nor do I know much about the Bronze Age. That's why I personally don't really care about seeming anachronisms like the Batman armor or the Viking longboat. Like, if you're really into history, I get why that would annoy you. But if I'm being honest, I probably wouldn't know those things were out of place unless people on the internet told me. And again, while I understand if you're Greek and you're upset that there are no Greeks in the adaptation of the Greek poem set in Greece, I do think that after 2,000 years in circulation, there is some sense to which the Odyssey kind of belongs to the world. It's been translated into over 100 languages. High school students all over the globe have been forced to struggle through it. It's been adapted tons of different times in tons of different ways. The 2004 SpongeBob SquarePants movie is a loose adaptation of the Odyssey. I think the story is proven flexible enough to withstand multiple interpretations. And that includes Nolan's, whose bold idea seems to be to cast lots of different kinds of people so long as they aren't Greek. And if the movie is entertaining, I'm willing to go along with that vision, and I'm betting that most other people are too. But if you believe the backlashers, we should all be freaking out because Nolan cast a few actors from minority groups in minor roles. Like, I cannot emphasize enough that Helen of Troy appears in the Odyssey for basically a scene. That said, we should mention that Lupita Nyong'o also plays Helen's sister Clytemnestra, which is interesting because Clytemnestra doesn't actually appear in the book in the flesh. She's only talked about. So they'll do a cutaway or something, I guess. I don't know. But either way, neither she nor Elliot Page are going to get much screen time.
Quick test. Close your eyes. Think of Helen of Troy. Did you think of Lupita Nyong'o? Probably not.
I didn't think of anything, Michael Knowles. I don't have a ready-made mental image of Helen of Troy in my head. Who does? I guess if I closed my eyes and thought about her long enough, I would eventually see this. I mean, she keeps repeating the name. I think that most of the objections the backlashers raise about historical accuracy and textual fidelity are pretexts. I think they see attacking Nolan's movie as a way to push a politically conservative narrative about Hollywood. We could call it the go woke, go broke narrative, to use a slogan that was popular among these kinds of critics in the late 2010s. This narrative posits, more or less, that putting queer people and people of color in movies and TV shows is part of a prolonged strategy by Hollywood elites to promote progressive messages, displace white and straight people, and in extreme cases, to erode Western civilization itself. That's the woke part, and that this strategy is doomed to fail and render the industry broke. Hollywood is attacking being straight and white again, tweets Dan Bilzerian about a movie starring these people. Det-laden mass shooting denier Alex Jones tweeted that casting Lupita Nyong'o in the Odyssey is tantamount to purposefully erasing any evidence that white Western culture ever existed. There are two big problems with the go woke, go broke theory of Hollywood. One is that it's often just used as an excuse to be bigoted in public. After the rumor that Elliot Page might play Achilles started up, videos and memes began to circulate where Page is too big for his armor or gets beaten up in a fight because he's a trans man and he's weak and womanly, ha ha ha. Never mind that Achilles doesn't do any fighting in the Odyssey, or that it wasn't confirmed at the time who Page was even playing.
It's still technically rumor territory, but the fact people instantly believed it says a lot about where Hollywood is culturally right now.
I love that. Yeah, it might not be true, but isn't the fact that people think it could be true more important? It's okay to keep sharing videos where Elliot Page is brutally killed, right? And look, I understand that social media is a cruel, hateful place. We all go there so we can enjoy being our worst selves, and sharing edgy videos is a part of that. I just wish these people would be more honest about why they're doing this, instead of acting like it's all justified because of lack of faithfulness to the source material they all care about so much. If these critics actually cared about the source material, they would be furious that John Bernthal is bald and has a brown beard in this movie. Why? Because in the Odyssey, I swear to God, Homer mentions that Menelaus has red hair every time his name comes up. Red-haired Menelaus, Menelaus the king with red hair. He says it like 50 different ways. And yet here's John Bernthal with nary a red hair anywhere, and nobody from the go woke, go broke crowd is upset about it. Because the go woke, go broke narrative is an anti-minority narrative. And John Bernthal is white, so he isn't a target. Meanwhile, Homer barely describes Helen of Troy at all, and yet Lupita Nyong'o is getting all this hate, because she is not white and is therefore fair game under this model. The other big problem with the go woke, go broke narrative is that it's really bad at predicting which Hollywood products actually succeed or fail. Under this model, a movie like Masters of the Universe, which is about a buff straight white guy fighting evil, should be a big hit, but it bombed. Probably because the people most interested in seeing it are Gen Xers who played with the He-Man toys as kids, but now they have no time to go to the movies because they have mortgages and families and bad knees. Conversely, under the go woke, go broke model, a show like Heated Rivalry should be hated or ignored because it's about a couple of gay hockey dudes who go to town on each other for 6 episodes straight. Instead, it's so popular that its fans still can't shut up about it over 6 months after the end of the first season. And just to clarify, I'm not saying that there aren't examples of movies with diverse casts that do bomb, or that there aren't self-satisfied liberals in Hollywood who get too cute with their casting choices. Like, I'm open to the idea of rapper Travis Scott playing a bard in the Odyssey, which is something else these reactionaries freaked out about. I don't think it's a big deal. But I do think that Christopher Nolan's explanation for casting him is kind of dorky and cringy. I cast him because I wanted to nod towards the idea that this story has been handed down as oral poetry, which is analogous to rap.
Boy, Jay-Z and Shakespeare have nothing in common. Or do they?
What I am saying is that movies and TV shows generally succeed or fail for reasons other than how many minority cast members are in them. The go woke, go broke theory of Hollywood is not a serious attempt to understand how Hollywood works. It is an attempt to advance a conservative political agenda, whether or not the people who push it realize that's what they're doing. It's the pop culture version of anti-minority narratives you hear from conservative politicians who talk all the time about how wokeness and DEI are ruining the country, ruining society even. It's just that kind of thing applied to movies and TV. Personally, I subscribe to a very different narrative of how Hollywood works, and I think mine's a lot more believable. By and large, I think Hollywood studios do it for the money. There are studies that show that audiences actually prefer movies with diverse casts. So if for some reason you're bothered enough by the presence of a trans person or a person of color on screen to wonder why they're there, it's probably less that Hollywood is trying to erase white culture, which is crazy talk, and more that they're trying to appeal to a broad audience because more people buying tickets means more money. This is not hard to figure out. Mind you, I don't think that's always the reason for every decision made on every movie. Christopher Nolan already explained why he cast Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy. Not that I expect the anti-woke people to believe that kind of benign explanation, because it doesn't fit with the narrative that Hollywood directors only cast women and minorities in visible roles to push some kind of agenda, or for some other secret motive. But many of them are willing to entertain easily falsifiable theories about irrelevant Oscar standards, because that does fit the narrative, and the narrative is what matters, not the facts. I imagine Nolan cast Elliot Page because he worked with Page before and wanted to again, just like he's worked with Matt Damon and Robert Pattinson and Anne Hathaway before. But I do think that Hollywood Want Money does a better job of explaining why studios do what they do than the idea that they're maliciously trying to reshape society by casting a few actors from minority groups in bit parts. Heaven help us. If they were making the poster honest for the Odyssey, writes anti-woke crank John Delarose, and the poster has Elliot Page, Lupita Nyong'o, and Travis Scott on it. So, you think that the honest way to advertise this movie is to make a poster with 3-bit players and none of the main characters on it? You have to be neck deep in this reactionary narrative world for this to make any kind of sense. But the go woke, go broke narrative of Hollywood has staying power because it pops up again and again and again. There will probably be a few more anti-woke backlashes by the time you're watching this.
She's very weirdly small, and they want us to believe she's this fierce, No, she was in Game of Thrones. She was very weird looking.
And these backlashes often resemble the one against the Odyssey. There will be some reasonable complaints. In the case of the Odyssey, it's stuff like the anachronisms, the accents, the money photography, and then the anti-woke crowd will come in and make it all about identity politics. They'll start obsessing over race, gender, and sexuality as if those are the only things worth talking about. One example is the Lord of the Rings TV show The Rings of Power, which weathered a racist backlash when it debuted on Amazon Prime Video in 2022. And the thing is, there are so many good reasons to criticize The Rings of Power. As a pretty big Lord of the Rings fan, I feel confident in saying that it is not very good, in my opinion. But it's not good because it's hacky and unimaginative and perfunctory. The problem with Arandir the Black Elf is not that he's black, it's that he's boring. If you're more like Disa the Dwarf, who's one of the few entertaining characters on that show, I wouldn't mind as much. Or look at the backlash to the final season of Stranger Things. Again, there's a lot to criticize. The stakes felt low, most of the dialogue was exposition. Any sense that the story was happening within a wider context was pretty much gone. But if you were there for this particular backlash, you know that a wildly disproportionate amount of hate was directed at the scene where Will Byers comes out to his friends and family. Because God forbid there be one gay guy in this stupidly oversized cast. And I'm not saying the scene was perfect, but the outsized amount of hate it got was ridiculous. There are plenty of people criticizing HBO's upcoming Harry Potter show, and for good reasons. Do we really need another adaptation of these books when the movies did a good job and aren't that old? But of course, the reactionaries have made it all about black actor Papa Asiedu playing Professor Snape. And the thing is, there actually are interesting arguments as to why that might be a bad idea. Snape is bullied as a kid at Hogwarts. Will those scenes now be, hate crime coded? Is the show prepared to grapple with that subtext? But the anti-woke crowd isn't taking that tack. they're conspiracy theorizing that the producers hate the franchise and its characters because they cast a black actor, and then standing by as that actor receives death threats. One comforting thing about these identity politics-powered backlashes is that they tend to be pretty flaccid and ineffective. Like, people piled on Stranger Things, but the finale was still one of the most watched episodes in Netflix history. The Odyssey took some heat, but ticket pre-sales still broke records. It's a good reminder that, for the most part, these backlashes are produced and consumed by people who spend too much time on the internet, which includes me, by the way. I don't want to act like I'm above this. Most normal people do not obsess over identity politics like the anti-woke folk do. They're not going to care that Lupita Nyong'o plays Helen of Troy for the space of a couple of scenes. If she is good in the role, they'll probably enjoy her performance. If The Odyssey is a good movie, it'll probably be a hit, and it won't be more complicated than that. But if you, like me, spend a lot of time online, maybe this video can give you a new way to think about these sorts of backlashes, and you'll be ready the next time one comes up, which will be any minute now, I'm sure.